By producing 5 video titles between 1991 and 1997, detailing railway operations in New Zealand during the steam era, the Memory Line partnership has created a lasting testimony of a way of life now rapidly becoming forgotten. The 3 filmmakers, each of whom has worked in the film industry for over 30 years, got together after they'd left their jobs at the National Film Unit. The 3 partners tell of their lives at the film unit and their subsequent experiences in the New Zealand film industry.
I joined the National Film Unit in 1962 at the age of 18 and had some very enjoyable years there. In those days were virtually given free rein to do what we wanted. We could suggest film ideas. We always had to do other productions that we were commissioned to make, etc. But in the time I was there, some of the most interesting work that I did was a film on the Denniston Incline, which actually led ultimately to the establishment of Memory Line Productions 22 years later. Another great experience was making the 3-screen film for Expo 70, this is New Zealand, that I did. And as a partnership, writing it with and editing with Dave Jordan, and I was the principal director with 2 other directors, and Kit Rawlings was doing the soundtrack. This is New Zealand made such an impact at Expo 70 in Osaka, Japan. It was decided as an experiment they'd exhibit it to a New Zealand audience. Well, the cinemas had to be specially converted to take the 3 projectors and the triple track stereo sound system, which was pretty unusual for those days, and it was set up in major venues in Wellington, Christchurch, Auckland and Dunedin, and people flocked to it. In fact, I think over 500,000 people saw it, which at the time was something like 1/5 of the population. In 1984 I could see that things were not working well at Avalon, and I finally resigned after 22 years of being there, and I went out and set up my own production company. I was in Auckland. I think I was shooting a job for the Dairy Board, and I was talking to an old friend of mine who was in film distribution, and he was moving into video sell-through market. That's sales through Whitcoulls and places like that. And he'd taken one of the films that I produced at the film unit called War Years, and he'd made it into a VHS and advertised it, and it sold very, very successfully. And he said to me, "Is there anything else you can do like that? Are there any other kind of New Zealand history productions you could make?" And I immediately thought of all of the film that I'd kept from the shooting of the film on the Denniston Incline in 1967. And I also thought of David and his interest and knowledge of rail history, and I thought of Kit and his abilities with stereo soundtracks. So I approached them and I said, let's see if we can make some of these for the sell-through market. It grew from that. We actually found that our films appealed just to average New Zealanders who's like to remember what things used to be like when they were young or when they lived in certain places. So we ended up making 5 productions over the years. The Memory Line productions have won about, I think it's 4 or 5 international awards. There was one award for the soundtrack for North Island Main Trunk at the US International Film and Video Festival. The productions have all been very successful, and they've been now reissued on DVD, and they'll be finding, we hope, a whole new sales of people who are unaware of the productions, or people who just want to replace their old VHS copies with brand new, spruced up, higher quality DVD copies.
I began in the film industry in 1965 at the National Film Unit and worked right through all facets of recording sound on location, sound editing in the studio, and sound mixing, and even to transferring the final sound mix to optical negative for matching with the picture. So in the early years we had a lot of training in all areas of sound. I left the film unit after 20 years. I resigned as sound director and took up a career in freelance sound work, mainly sound editing and some recording, but mainly sound editing. And then when computers came along, that meant that there had to be a choice between location equipment and editing equipment, and the computer and the editing system was what I finally decided on, because there's a huge outlay in capital expenditure for whatever field you use now in sound, whether it's the computer or location recording equipment.
Well, I left Auckland University in 1966 and got a job as a production trainee at the National Film Unit, which was quite a good thing for me at that time, because the National Film Unit offered paid training and experience. And so very soon after I joined the Film Unit, I was out directing my own pictures when I was really a novice. I'm often working with much more experienced camera crews than I was, of course, and they helped us young people along. That's if you got on okay with the cameraman. And I worked with several very good cameramen, Brian Cross and Kel Fowler, who were legendary cameramen at that time in New Zealand, and I was very fortunate to be able to pick up the information and the experience which they passed on. So really, by the time I'd been at the Film Unit for a year or two, I'd actually been out directing pictures. I was writing scripts, narrations, I was editing films, writing treatments, choosing music, doing everything. That these days, I think I really feel sorry for young people these days, and they have not got the chances that we had at that time. And I was very fortunate to be thrown in at the deep end and making my own documentaries and getting a chance to have them entered in overseas film festivals and getting awards as well. So by the time I'd been at the Film Unit for a few years, I'd been making movies for, or I should say films for television and for cinema, tourist promotions, television commercials, drama eventually, the whole lot. And when the National Film Unit was sold in 1990, I'd been there over 20 years, and I'd probably had as much, if not more, experience than many people in New Zealand at that time. And it was a bit of a shock to all of us who'd been at the Film Unit for the place to be sold. A group of us got together and to produce and direct and make a variety of different projects. Some cases there were corporate videos and various other work that we'd been trained to do at the Film Unit. And one of these was the Memory Line series, which I got together with Hugh MacDonald and Kit Rawlings to make documentaries about New Zealand's social and transport history, using the old people who were still around, people of my parents' generation who were born around about the early part of the First World War.
In 2002, the partners accepted the task to recreate a trip over the Rimutaka Railway Incline and set about producing a film utilising modern video and sound techniques to simulate the railway journey in the late 1940s. Since movie cameras were invented, film enthusiasts have been recording historic events. Many of them did not fully realise the lasting impact their films could make.
When the idea of making Rimutaka 1949 came up, it was only possible because we had already met some of the early filmmakers, had some of the collections of these early archives that they had shot of the trains in the late 40s and early 1950s. Of those people whose films appear in Rimutaka 1949, Jim Goggin is still alive. And some of that footage of his is some of the best material that was ever shot on the Rimutaka Incline. He went to the Rimutaka Incline with Joyce Galbraith and a few others, and he had a good 16mm camera and film, colour film. Not that the colour's relevant, because we haven't used colour in this movie. We've intentionally desaturated everything to make it look like old black and white movies. But Jim Goggin's footage is in there, and it is crucial and fundamental to some of the special effects that we have in the movie. Of the other people, When I was a kid, I met Dawson Wilkinson, who is somewhat older than I am. He was an accountant at the time. He went to the Rimutaka Incline in the last months and filmed the trains on the incline. And his photography was a very high standard as well. He also shot 16mm colour using a Bolex camera, which shot very good images, as good images as you'll get on any movie camera today. I think probably another person worth noting is Joyce Galbraith. She didn't have access to 16mm camera. She used 8mm black and white camera and film. The interesting thing about Joyce was that she was the head of a camera club in Wellington, and she had very high standards of photography as well as an interest in telling stories. She also liked filming people. Many of the others got on with filming the trains, which was essential, of course, but Joyce got some of the shots of the locomotive depot and the firemen and the drivers and the cleaners and all those people who other photographers tended to ignore and overlook. Joyce managed to get Ray Holmes interested in firing H201 up to make several trips up and down the incline for her camera. And there are one or two of the shots which we've used in the movie of H201 coming directly towards the camera, almost up to a stage where it almost hit the camera lens. And that was thanks to Joyce and Ray's close teamwork that they managed to pull that shot off. They were able to film shots with the fill engine that were absolutely unique, including the shots, of course, of the engine coming into the Summit Tunnel. That shot was never shot before and certainly couldn't have been since. So between those people, we have a really unique record of the fill engines at work. With Rimutaka 1949, what we were keen to do was to create an experience for our audience that no one else could have. For obvious reasons, you cannot travel on the incline at present, and the number of people who travel on it who have memories, of course, they're all getting quite old now because it is 50 years since the incline closed. So it was our intention to create for the visitors of the museum an experience of travel on the incline as close as it would be based upon the memories of people who I've spoken with. And my idea was to start the movie in the tunnel and to end the movie in the tunnel, because by going into the tunnel you're going into the past, a bit like The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, C.S. Lewis's classic story, where the children go through the cupboard and into Narnia and go into a different medium, a different time. And that's what we've done with Rimutaka Incline. We're able to do that by going through the tunnel and into the past.
That bell goes back to very early times on the Rimutaka Incline, and it's tripped in the darkness by the passing wheels so that train crews know exactly when they've come off the incline onto more level track.
When we decided to record the bell in the tunnel, one of the reasons that I wanted to do that was that was where its original location was, and the acoustics in the tunnel would be identical with the acoustics as they were on the day when the fill locomotive ran through the tunnel, with the exception, of course, that the engine wasn't there, and that would affect the sound. But I think that recording the bell in the tunnel enabled us to get the true ambience, the true reverb, the natural reverb of the tunnel. So Cliff Lee built a box to mount the bell on, and David made a lever that would act as the wheels that used to trip the bell. And when we set it up in the tunnel, Graham Jupp knew exactly where the location used to be, so we put the bell in exactly the same location. David Sims got himself into the rhythm of an engine and pretended he was the engine triggering the bell on as each wheel went over, and he actually knew the length of time that each bogie would travel. So he pretended to be the engine. He rang the bell, and so we got some really unique recordings of the old bell back in the tunnel. Well, the Rimutaka Incline film was quite difficult because we had to start with no sound whatsoever for the original pictures. There was, however, an early quarter-inch tape recording and an early acetate disc recording, which I was able to get a copy of and transfer those into the computer, edit them and work on them and process them, take out clicks and as much noise as possible, and then record modern day, well, restored steam engines, record the sound from those and use some of the chuffs to make up a simulated fill engine sound. And David Sims provided the information about which chuffs of which engine would be suitable, and the decision was that a JA would be close enough for the outside engine and a WW for the inside engine. And so we took some of the chuffs of the JA, looped them, and some of the chuffs of the WW, and after measuring the difference in the diameter of the driving wheels, we worked out that the inside wheels were 85% of the outside ones, and so we were able to make up a repetitive loop that went over and over at the same speed. Some of the original recordings had the sound of the engines going up the hill, and so I was able to use some of those mixed in with the ones that I did as well.
Kit required additional genuine railway sounds, and he chose to record them at the Silverstream Railway, aboard a vintage wooden carriage and guards van.
I'm just setting up to record the interior of the carriage. Once we get rolling with the diesel train up front, but there should be enough carriage noise from here, hopefully.
We chose to shoot some of the scenes for Rimutaka in 1949 at the Silverstream Railway, where they have a kilometre of track and a couple of carriages. We needed to film the human interest part, which was not covered by the original cinema photographers, who were, apart from Joyce, shot a lot of train shots and locomotive crews, but very few people ever shot any of the human interest of people on the Rimutaka Incline.
When I was a kid, they used to have these seats down in the South Island, and we used to travel from there, from Christchurch down to these seats.
We've heard many tales of passengers and getting their hats blown off and getting their face full of soot and cinders and this and that. And there are many tales about the Rimutaka Incline, but very few shots of the people themselves travelling on the trains, because the people who took the pictures were dedicated to get the trains themselves while they were still around. And no one took much of interest in the Rimutaka Incline until the last months, and all of a sudden there was a great rush to take train pictures, but not people pictures. So we needed to recreate some of those scenes to go in the carriages. And I guess that what we did, we shot with new cameras, modern DV cameras on videotape, digitally enhanced subsequently in post-production.
That was really good. That was the tape.
Thank you.
Very good, Tommy.
You pass your driver's license, you don't have to make this 15 at all. Shooting the human interest for Rimutaka in 1949 was really unfinished business as far as I was concerned. Joyce and Dawson and Jim and the others had shot some magnificent railway footage, and we needed to shoot new material of the people interest to go with the trains, so that the unfinished business was finished by us 50 years later. He's going to take you to the station platform. You can get off now. Have a well-earned cup of tea.
Okay, now just a minute, hang on.
Our intention, of course, was when we finished making the movie, was to put everything together, the old films and the new material, to make it look as if it was all shot in the 1940s. So what we did was we actually imported some special film effects and filters on the internet, downloaded onto my Apple Mac G5, which we used to edit the movie with Final Cut Pro 4.5, so that we could degenerate the modern digital images with human interest, with scratches and whatever have you. Not that there were bad scratches on the old movies, but anyway, we had to make the old movies and the modern movie look like an old movie. And so with digitally enhanced effects, we were able to shoot the new material and edit it with the old material, which was retransferred onto a 16 by 9 format, to make it look as if everything had been shot 50 years ago.
On our way down, we're going to drop 869 feet in just 3 miles. On this train, we've got plenty of braking power. But just in case, the points are always set for the safety siding at Cross Creek. That long whistle hoot tells the signalman we're under control, so he can set the runaway points for the station yard.
We had a great day of filming reconstructions on the Silverstream Railway because the railway carriages were exactly of the period and the people were in period costume. So we took every opportunity we could to get any angle of the train that would cut into the existing footage. And obviously a close-up of the carriage wheel was one, so I stood on the footplate of the front and just leant right down and put the camera handheld in as close as I could to the wheel to get a dramatic close-up of it. Kit recorded the stereo sound, and that shot appears in the film just before the train enters the top of the tunnel at Summit.
When you hear the bell, the incline starts. It's near the far end of Summit Tunnel.
We also filmed in the guards van. We had a lot of props. We'd borrowed from a friend, John Bell, who has a movie cinema and it's a movie museum, and he also has various props and things. So we were able to make it look exactly as it would have looked in the year in which the story is placed. That's 1949. Sometimes the shots were taken when the train was actually stationary, so it wasn't moving, so I would be sort of hand-holding the camera and just rocking around to simulate motion. And other times the train was going up and down the track, repeatedly backwards and forwards over 1 kilometre of track.
We carry anything from homing pigeons to coffins. To date, 3 royal parties have been up the incline, and even the first talking movies in Masterton came over the Rimutakas.
David wanted to recreate scenes as they actually happened, particularly at Siberia, where the wind would suddenly come upon them with unexpected force. It would tear their hats off their heads, and that would be, many hats would have been lost over the years. So we set this up. We didn't, in fact, the train wasn't moving, so fortunately there was a side track, and the Silverstream Railway people managed to find us a little trolley, which I sat on a chair on, and Kit pushed me along it for the shot. Because the carriage was static and it was on a flat level, I tilted the camera just slightly so I could see the horizon, the line of the carriage roof was on an angle, so it would simulate going up the incline. We tracked one way and the carriage appears to move the other way, whereas in fact the camera is moving and the carriage is perfectly still. Once we got to the exactly opposite Desmond Kelly, the actor who was looking out the window, David, as director, called to cue Graham, who had the hat attached to an invisible nylon fishing line on the other side of the train. And at this stage, Graham wound like mad, and the hat just flew off like magic, and it was very effective. In fact, the second take, I think it was, it broke me up completely. It was one of the funniest things I'd seen. The shot, as was used, was very brief because the hat was gone literally in a matter of frames. So David wanted to extend it and see what happened to the hat after that. So he and Graham went down to Scorching Bay and against a bush background tossed a hat into the air and caught it as it just flew off and disappeared, and that was cut on straight after the shot of the hat disappearing over the roof of the carriage, and it makes a seamless transition to the hat disappearing forever. And that, accompanied by Desmond Kelly's anguished wail, I think worked extremely well and brings a nice light touch into the film.
Somehow you know that if anything's going to go wrong, it'll happen up here at Siberia. At least in a carriage you can close the window.
One of the most important vehicles on the Rimutaka Incline were the brake vans that they needed to use on the way down the incline. They had them cut into the train, and they always had one on the back. For some reason or other, no one ever shot a movie shot of the brake van, especially the one at the back, with the brakes rewinding the handles. I had seen some still pictures taken by official Railways government photographer, I think in the late 40s. But there were no movie shots, and we decided that we needed to film that. Many people filmed shots of the train going up the incline, but very few shots were taken of the trains going down. And as far as I was concerned, the trains going down were equally as interesting, in fact more so, because there was always a danger of runaways, you see, going down the hill. And of course that's why the brake vans are so important. Well, when we decided to shoot the scenes with the brake van, we were lucky because there was just one Phil brake van that had been restored and is in the museum. That's very good. Keep going, guys. One's actually a lamppost, and he's just doing a lamppost. I think that's excellent.
Yeah, it's very good. Two work well together.
Although it was very clean and newly restored, we were able to use that, but we had to add other ingredients to that, of course, so we had to put a Phil brakesman in there, and Jim Henderson, who's the treasurer of the Friends of the Phil, very kindly acted as a brakesman, having seen some pictures of what they did. He was able to emulate the actions, but it was important for us to add an extra ingredient, and that was the rails through the door at the back, because if you sat in the rear van on the train going down, you look out the door and there was the track going away behind. We were fortunate that Jim Goggin had shot some movie film going up the incline in 1952-53 from a rail car, which we were able to desaturate and reverse in the computer so that it looked as if that point of view of the rails was in fact going down the incline. In order to combine the old movie footage that we had reversed and desaturated and put it together with the modern shot of Jim Henderson in the van at the museum, we were able to employ blue screen technology, which is the same technology which Peter Jackson has used on The Lord of the Rings and more recently King Kong. And in fact we used a couple of his technical people who came along with blue screens for the day. So we had a couple of members of the King Kong crew working with us with a blue screen beyond, lighting that blue screen and filming the action in the van. Later at home on our G5 computer, Graham Moffat, who is a colleague of mine who's working on the special effects with this, was able to superimpose, by using the blue screen, the shot of the rails receding away in the background beyond Jim Henderson, and by a bit of extra playing around with a few scratches and this and that and other thing, we were able to create a brand new, real-looking, old-fashioned, old movie shot of the Rimutaka Incline that people, when they see it, do not know we created. They thought it was real.
We're now on the lower incline and still descending at 10 miles an hour down the 1 in 15 grade. From its opening day, the incline has been the lifeblood of the Wairarapa.
We used several blue screen shots on Rimutaka 1949. Apart from the guard going down the incline, we also set up blue screens in front of H199, the locomotive in the museum, and filmed looking forward out of the locomotive window so that you had a view of an engine driver as it would have been travelling up the incline, because again, very few people shot those shots. It wasn't easy to film on board a Phil engine for a start. The cabin was very confined, it was full of coal, there was a driver and a fireman, and there wasn't much room for anybody else. And that's probably the reason why there were very few shots ever taken on those engines from the footplate, either forward or looking backwards. The use of blue screens is a very common technique in modern day movie making, especially with so many special effects type movies that have been made, like Lord of the Rings and King Kong and what have you in Hollywood. So it's a very common use of blue or green screens so that you can superimpose images over others and play around with special effects that you could never have done without them. Setting the blue screen up is quite a time-consuming job. It can often take hours, and in fact some cases I'm sure even days, and very large sets to actually build the frames and put the blue screens and light them and do takes and retakes. So it's quite an elaborate procedure, which when you come to shoot it and when you come to edit it, what could be hours and hours of work could end up just being just a few seconds on the screen.
It's always a battle for summit.
Some live scenes detailing aspects of the Rimutaka Railway could not be reproduced, as the only material available was still photographs. To maintain the atmosphere from surrounding scenes, it was decided to add motion elements to the stills to make them appear as movie shots. One of these was a scene of houses at Cross Creek, taken from a photograph at the Fell Museum. The young boy walking along a fence line was filmed in a suburb of Wellington. The fence line shots are fitted onto the still photo and scaled and rotated to fit the still scene, and adjusted to fit in with the original photo, so the changes made are not obvious. A large tree and smoke coming from the chimney of one of the houses were also added to complete the scene.
We have no shops or streets, just a rough cinder track for cycles and prams.
When I presented the concept for the Rimutaka 1949 to the museum people a few years ago now, before they started fundraising for it, I was always convinced that the story would need to be told by somebody who lived and worked on the incline. You would never see the person, but it would be a voice who would speak for the community of people who lived along the incline and operated the incline. That bell goes back to early times on the Rimutaka Incline, and it's tripped the darkness. Get rid of the darkness and move that later. Train crews know exactly when they've climbed off the incline onto level track before arriving at summit. Yeah, that fits better. That bell goes back to very early times on the Rimutaka Incline, and it's tripped in the darkness by the passing wheels so that train crews know exactly when they've climbed off the incline onto the level track before arriving at summit. When I was writing the narration for Rimutaka 1949, I was quite keen to find a voice that would read it. So when I was writing it, I needed to have that voice in my mind, so that when I wrote the words, I could imagine a particular person reading those words so that it would help me write it. And we chose Phil Darkins. He's quite a well-known Wellington radio voice, and he also is quite a good commercial voice. He has very good diction, and he's very good at starting voices and taking things on, and he works quite hard at things. And I needed someone with a commitment to it. And of course, Phil also happens to like trains, which was a good thing for the movie. So Phil and I had a couple of sessions on the script. I ran him some Radio New Zealand recordings that were made in the 1950s, where a number of very old men who had served on the Rimutaka Incline back as late as the 1890s and early 1900s, when those men met together at Cross Creek, and they had this sort of post-colonial, which I call post-colonial New Zealand male accent that I was looking for. Most of the sound effects are finished now. You start off in the movie when you're in the summit tunnel. When the lights go down and you're in there, and for 30 seconds you've got the sound of going through the tunnel and the bell going past you and going behind you and then bursting out into the yard. So that's the experience they're going to get, and that's what they get at the end. So you're kind of going into the movie and out of the movie by the summit tunnel.
I'm going to be a guy who worked on the Rimutaka Railroad, or railway, or the incline. I don't know how old he is, but he's a guy who's passionate about it, and he's going to be pretty sorry that it's closing down.
Yeah,
well,
that's what I've been singing U2 songs all the way here, screaming at the top of my voice.
I was just thinking we're going to try it on the mic just to get a different sound, but then I'm ready.
It's okay to me.
A little bit higher.
I'm only getting one.
Yeah, we're going to do pickups later on.
What's wrong with pickups at the end?
Okay.
As long as you know what the key number is, whatever it is.
Yeah, have you got
right.
private facility for me?
No, I know all the words upside down.
And it's tripped in the darkness by the passing wheels so that train crews know exactly when they've come off the incline onto more level track before arriving at summit. Here we're going to take a look around before catching a ride down the incline on the next train. Summit's listed as a halt for train running purposes.
You're right, I think we'll go for that. We can always dull it down a bit, can't we? It's best to have more tops and something than taken down rather than having something you've got to brighten up, I think.
We had to mix this video at Peter Jackson's Park Road Post studios because it required a 5.1 surround sound stereo mix, and I'm not equipped to do that. Very few studios are. Peter Jackson's facility at Park Road is at the moment best film mixing studio in the world. It's a cracker, and they have the encoding programs that are required to encode the 5.1 mix onto a video, onto the final DVD. So the decision was made to mix at Park Road Post, and they generally look pretty favourably on local filmmakers, so we don't pay the full commercial rates that feature films would pay.
This must be the smallest, most talked about station in the world, where just a handful of railway families live, and a few sidings where engines are changed and brake vans added for the Rimutaka Incline.
I just have a small hard drive, and it all fitted on that. I just took it out to Park Road Post, we plugged it in and used their mixing console, which has just over 200 individual mixing channels. It's completely automated, so whatever action you do on a fader, it memorises and repeats it. The only disadvantage with mixing at Park Road Post is that you know that is the best you'll ever hear it, and there's no facility that will ever reproduce it exactly as it sounds in there. So it really is a delight to hear everything superb in superb quality.
In September 2005, the Fell Locomotive Museum commemorated its first 25 years of operation. And to celebrate the occasion, the Rimutaka 1949 movie had its first public screening. Museum members and invited guests began arriving late in the afternoon, as the final touches were being made to the temporarily installed projection and sound systems.
Just so that you all know, David's the director and writer, Hugh is the producer and the cameraman, and Kit Rollins here, the sound designer.
Going back to when the formation of the Memory Line Partnership in 1991 was about the time when we did the film documentary. By our resources and the cooperation of the friends of the film, and we've had a very long association with you people over the years, so that while you've been going for 25 years, our association with you people has proven to be successful tonight, because we've at last been able to produce this next movie, and I think that probably without the three of us and you people, this would not have been made possible. And I think that what we've done with this movie is we've brought a piece of history that's been dead for 50 years. We've actually brought it back to life.
We're using resources to recreate from old images and old sounds, authentic, very, very realistic impressions of what it was like to be on the incline in 1949. There were a lot of reconstructions using the Fell van and the Fell loco, and then Kit spent a lot of time in reconstructing the sound, and we mixed it together at Peter Jackson's studio, and all these elements took a long time to get together in their highest possible quality, and it was all thanks to the people at the museum, the friends who managed to raise the budget to do it the proper way.
I just hope that you all enjoy it, and it's been a pleasure working with the Fell people and your wonderful hospitality. Thank you very much, and please enjoy it. Thank you.
After speeches from the Mayor of Featherston, other dignitaries and members of the Memory Line team, 3 screenings were held for the 90 people present.
Early times on the Rimutaka Incline. And it's stripped in the darkness by the passing wheels so that train crews know exactly when they've come off the incline onto more level track before arriving at some.
Maybe it's the incline beckoning us back to our pioneering origins, or just the love of a challenge. Whatever you think, another battle for Summit has just been won.
It was really great.
Approval was unanimous from all those who watched the movie. After the installation of the permanent theatre system, Rimutaka 1949 will contribute to the overall experience visitors get at the Fell Locomotive Museum.
Wonderful.
I think it's absolutely fantastic. What you've actually created on there is unbelievable. And I know how some of it was created, and it's just big as description. It's wonderful.
Oh, it was absolutely brilliant. The sounds especially, I thought, was absolutely wonderful.
Fantastic. It really was excellent and going to thoroughly enjoy showing it to people.